In this exercise, we're going to turn this graphic into a tracing template. Now, you might say, Deke, hey, we already did that. Back in the previous chapter, we took those spirals and dimmed them down in order to make them tracing objects, and that is true. And what we're going to do now involves a similar technique. However, the implications of this technique are very different, and it's a more powerful technique as well. So if you're working along with me, make sure that you have open bigstargraphic.ai, found inside the O5 Shapes folder. And take a look at the Layers panel. You'll see that there's 3 layers: Guides, which contains all the custom guides that I've created for you, so it'll make it easier to follow along with me. Then we have the Tattoo graphic on top. If I turn off Shapes for a moment, you'll see that that is that heartboard graphic that we created in the previous chapter. I did slightly adjust the positioning of the top 2 spirals on either side, but otherwise it's exactly the same. And then we have the shapes that we're going to be drawing here on the Shapes layer. Now, it's the Shapes layer that I want to convert to a tracing template. Let's say, though, just for the sake of demonstration, that you're thinking that you want to pull this off without any help. You want to work without a net. You don't need the Shapes layer to trace them, so you're just going to throw that Shapes layer away, and you're going to be working freeform along with me. Well, good for you, except I would not recommend you throw that layer away. And I did that, incidentally, by dragging my layer down here to this little trash icon in the bottom right corner of the Layers panel. But I never recommend you delete things inside of Illustrator, unless you just drew a line and you want to delete it and start over again, some little thing like that. But if you draw a fully fledged design element and it just doesn't quite work, then just hide it. So I'll go ahead and press Control-Z, Command-Z on the Mac, to undo the deletion of that Shapes layer. And if I felt like freeforming it, I would click its eyeball in order to hide it, create a new layer on which to draw, and away I go. But here's what I prefer you do instead. Turn that Shapes layer back on, meatball it by clicking on this little circle icon, and I want you to notice that meatball is currently hollow. And by that I mean it's filled with that light gray interface color. All right, now notice up here in the control panel on the far left side that we have targeted the entire layer. So any attribute that I assign will affect the layer as a whole, while the objects inside of the layer will still have their own individual attributes. And let me show you what that looks like. I'm going to change the opacity value up here in the control panel to 25%, and then press the Enter key, or the Return key on a Mac, and you can see that dims all of those selected objects. Notice also that my meatball is suddenly volumetric. And whenever you see a shady meatball like that, it means that you have some form of translucency associated with that object. And the reason you get the shady meatball is it's a kind of subtle warning. You see, the PostScript printing language, which is the prevalent print technology out there, does not support translucency. So the old school philosophy was that a vector-based drawing program like Illustrator should not do anything that strays outside the realm of PostScript, because after all, that would introduce printing problems. The new philosophy, and this has pretty much emerged over the course of the previous decade, is that you should be able to do anything you want to, and Illustrator, along with PDF and PostScript, should be able to reconcile. And that's pretty much the way things have come down over time. So as a rule, translucency is no more likely to cause printing problems than a bunch of other things. Anyway, we're interested in making a template, not printing these objects. I'm going to go ahead and twirl open the Shapes layer, and I want you to notice that none of these objects inside the layer have volumetric meatballs. They are all white. So they're all together hollow. And if I target the red star, for example, and I go up to the opacity value, it's 100%. So notice this. It's just a function of this star residing in this layer that makes it translucent. If I grab red star and I move it into the tattoo layer like so, it all of a sudden becomes opaque again. Similarly, if I grab some element out of the tattoo layer like the heart and drag it down into Shapes, it becomes translucent. So anything that goes into a translucent layer becomes translucent. Anything that moves into an opaque layer becomes opaque. And it's a great way to be able to control global aspects of your objects inside of Illustrator. All right, I don't want this particular weird combination of things going on here, so I'll press Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac a couple of times in order to restore my objects to their proper layers. And then I'll twirl close Shapes, and I'll twirl close Tattoo. And the next thing I'm going to do is add a layer by Alt-clicking or Option-clicking on the little page icon down here at the bottom of the Layers panel. And you may recall by Alt or Option-clicking, I force the display of the Layer Options dialog box. I'm going to switch the color to light blue, because currently I don't have any light blue colored layers going on. And red would be a great color for another graphic. There's too much red inside of this graphic for it to work out very well. So light blue is our best bet, I think. And I'll call this drawing because this is the layer on which we'll be drawing over the course of this chapter, and I'll click OK. And finally, I'll press Control-Shift-A or Command-Shift-A to deselect everything in this illustration, and I'll lock down the shapes layer by clicking in this second column next to the shapes layer inside the layers panel. And we are now ready to begin drawing our shapes inside our tracing template here inside Illustrator.